God's been God a long time, but on the way to the top, God's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. God's made many enemies, and somebody got pissed. Somebody's not happy. And now, what do you know? God is dead. I'm Larry Charles, and I want to know, who killed God? So to solve a crime, it's often helpful to know more about the victim. What were they into? Who were their associates? What were their hangouts? What's their history? Knowing these facts can be helpful in figuring out all the rest of the elements of the crime. So let's get to know our victim. In short, who is God? So generally speaking, before you can say a murder has been committed, you need a body, a corpse. With God, admittedly that gets a little tricky. Not impossible, because nothing's impossible with God, right? Just tricky. I'm not talking about Christ now, even though his body's never really been found, or really ever even been seen by anybody. I'm talking about God, man. God, his Father. God, the Father. Which of course brings us to the first issue, gender and pronouns. Like we know Jesus was a man, though come to think of it, I've never seen his penis depicted anywhere, have you? Maybe she was a bearded woman, which would make sense because God, him, her, themself definitely gives off a lot of mixed gender vibes. Now lots of people will say, this is an easy one. God is neither man nor woman. God is God. I'd like to see that autopsy. Try taking that to court. Some people think God is the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So does that mean there are 3 bodies? And it seems what's missing in that equation is a vagina. Other people think God is the Father, a male figure, because he beget the world, which is surprisingly sexist. I mean, did your father beget you? It seems like the mother is really the begetter. And it seems like today, the patriarchy has won. The patriarchy? What do they know about this? Is the patriarchy some sort of secret society? We may have yet another suspect, if we can figure out who they are. When God is referred to as a he, what does that even mean? Does God have a penis? Does he piss? Does he fuck? Who's he fucking? Are we saying there's a gigantic invisible man in the sky who's been making millions and billions of little men for eons? That doesn't sound like God. That sounds like a job on the assembly line of a toy factory. And if God created man in his, her, it, they own image, wouldn't he, she, it, they have also created woman in his, her, it, they image? You know what I'm saying. And if God transcends gender, then why didn't they come up with a better word for it so that we don't have to say he all the time? They make up words for everything else. Invent a pronoun. There are references strewn throughout the Bible to God giving birth, which is weird. There are also references to a Sophia, who was sort of like God's secretary or Girl Friday. Very 1950s, but not cool today. We may have ourselves a very transgender God. Like when Moses confronts God, God says, I am who I am. People would be freaked out, even today, if he, she, they said, I am both man and woman, and neither man and woman. A lot of God-fearing people would stop fearing God and just say, God's a freak. That Westboro Baptist Church, they'd start carrying signs saying, God hates God. And in truth, the personal name of God, the name you would call God by if you were calling God's house, is Yahweh. Is Yahweh there? Is Yahweh home? Yeah, I know this might involve God's parents, and we'll get into that. I mean, who's answering the phone? But Yahweh is a unique combination of feminine and masculine name. God could have been more definitive. God could have cleared all this up with a simple non-gender specific name, like Drew or Cameron or Taylor or Jesse or Jody or Tracy or Jan. Hi, I'm Jan, the Almighty. So look, we have to acknowledge there is something freakish about God. There are many religious people who just want to avoid the subject altogether. They say if you have to ask, you just don't get it. But you know what? That's not going to cut it on the witness stand, even the Jehovah's Witness stand. So is God the first non-binary being? And if so, why didn't he create us in that image? It's hard to conduct this inquiry, this investigation, without right off the bat knowing God's gender and what pronoun to refer to God as. Or even if God has a gender, you have to keep an open mind in the early stages of an investigation. You don't want to get locked into a scenario because you will easily veer off course, which is ironic because religion actually works the other way. You lock into a scenario and you never dare veer off course. But limiting God to one gender seems like such a human folly. If we believe God is omnipresent, ubiquitous, if we believe that God is everything and everywhere, then how do we believe he's either a he or a she? So in this modern context, with the acknowledgement of transitioning and blurring gender identities, don't we also need to recognize that the limitations of the people that wrote the Bible led them to refer to God as a he because they knew no better? But we do. Or do we? So here's another dilemma. If we refer to God as they, that suggests more than one God. And the God whose death we're investigating, the God that's been killed, is the monotheistic God, right? Maybe not. I don't know. This is a tough case. Which God are we talking about? Buddha? Allah? Are we talking about the Old Testament God? The New Testament God? Are we talking about Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu? Which God has been murdered? And is there any difference? Has one God been murdered who's been presenting himself to us as many gods? And here's another problem. It's not just a gender issue. God is cagey, slipping in and out of different personas and guises throughout history. Let's examine some of that evidence. God's been a burning bush. God's been wind. God's been a bird. God's been a lion, but also a lamb. God's been a ghost. Sometimes God appears as just a word. God's been a cloud. God's been disguised as a household item like a lamp. God's appeared as an appliance like an oven. God's even been a rock. So why would God go to such great lengths to disguise themselves and hide their true identity? What was God thinking? Was God thinking, the people I've created in my own image won't be able to handle seeing me? If they see I have a penis and a vagina, they're going to freak out. Does God think we'll be horrified by their true self? Does God even think? Was there a thought process that led to, I know, this time I'll be a burning bush? It doesn't make any sense to me. If you've got invisibility, why would you pretend to be a lampstand? But I never understood why Superman bothered going to the trouble of pretending to be Clark Kent. So who is God? Well, the so-called good book isn't much help. You would think it would be one big pro-God puff piece. You know, God is great and all that. But in truth, it paints a picture of a very volatile, frankly unstable personality. Let's see. God is benevolent yet vengeful, capricious yet forgiving. God is jealous. God is jealous. How petty and small-minded is that? What does God have to be jealous of? Other gods? No, not really. It's mostly statues, souvenirs, trinkets, and shit like that. A small golden calf is threatening to God. Get over it! God is ancient yet totally immature. You see what I'm saying? The Old Testament is a pro-God book, but it reads like an unauthorized biography. God needs a therapist. God needs medication. I mean, is this a game for God? Is this some sort of cosmic hide and seek? I'm going to disguise myself. Not just like the song says, what if God was one of us, but what if God was your oven? And then, with less clues and evidence than for the existence of Bigfoot, we're supposed to uncover God. Kind of babyish, isn't it? Kind of a kid's game. Is God just a big baby? If so, where are God's parents? Are we supposed to close our eyes and count like a game of hide and seek? Or is that what praying is? What would you count to? Infinity? If God is infinite, you have to count forever. And that brings us back to our central question. Who is God indeed? Maybe in order to know God, we need to go back to literally the beginning. Let's look at the concept of in the beginning, the first line of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Okay, if God created the heavens and the earth, where was God before that? Where was God standing? Is God floating in nothingness or in some sort of primordial jello-like substance? How did God come to be? If God had parents, it's likely they existed before recorded time, so let's be clear. In the beginning, this is not eyewitness testimony. This is pure hearsay evidence that would be inadmissible in any court. What does that mean? What happened before the beginning began? What was God up to before time? What was God doing before the Big Bang? Was God born of the Big Bang, or did God cause it? And let there be light. That always sounded like a gimmick to me. Like some sort of magic trick. And then there are the opening lines from the New Testament. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I mean, what the fuck? What beginning is that? Is that a different beginning? Where was this word? Who said this word? Who heard this word? Did God say the word God? Was that God's first word? Not mama or dada, but God? The word is with God and the word is God? God doesn't sound like a lot of fun to play with. God's got the word is God, it's God's game, it's God's rules, it's totally rigged. God has to win. So this doesn't help us know God. In fact, it makes it more confusing. Maybe we can know God by his words. Here are some of God's words from Leviticus. Then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, for the generations to come, none of your descendants who has a physical defect may approach to offer the food of his God. No man who has any defect may approach. No man who is blind, lame, disfigured, or deformed. No man who has a broken foot or hand, or who is a hunchback or dwarf, or who has an eye defect, a festering rash, scabs, or, and here, perhaps I agree with God, a crushed testicle. Does that sound like God or a Tinder profile? Is that God running a religion or a modeling agency? It sounds like the Almighty is grossed out by man. He's squeamish around humans. God keeps his, her, theirs distance. Like God doesn't want to catch anything. Maybe God is like Howard Hughes, walking around in heaven in a dirty robe with scraggly hair and a beard and long, unkempt nails. So here we are. Once you're asking who is God, you're opening up a whole other set of questions. Which God? What God? When God? Maybe God was murdered thousands and thousands, if not millions of years ago. I may need the Hubble telescope to find evidence. Maybe God's lying in a black hole on the side of space somewhere. And as I learn more about God, I find I know even less. God has many faces and many masks. God is many things to many people. Maybe too many things to too many people. In fact, it may be that God is unknowable, and that would suck. So is there one God or many gods or no gods? It's not enough to say God is dead, who killed God, but which God, what God? So who is God? I don't have a clue. Is there a body? Maybe. Maybe there's a body. Maybe there's many bodies. And maybe there's none. It's frustrating, but I am not deterred. I may just need to try a different tact. A murder case needs a body, yes. But I might have to face the fact that there may never be a body. There may never have been a body, or there may be many, many bodies. It's not the ideal scenario, but murders on rare occasions can be proven without bodies. And what could be more of a rare occasion than this? The question of who is God remains an elusive one. Everybody knows who God is, but nobody actually knows God. Why should it be easy? Why should it be cut and dried? Why should it be open and shut? That seems to be part of God's plan. Make sure that humans stay confused and don't get too close. Is God just an abusive parent? We need a break in the case. Somebody saw something, somebody heard something, somebody knows something, and sooner or later they're going to talk. Unless the world ends first, of course. One thing for sure, we know that there were and are no shortage of reasons for killing God. And so in part 3 of Who Killed God, we explore the many, 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 many possible motives for the killing of God. Until then, if you have any information that might lead to the solving of this case, please leave a comment. I'm Larry Charles, and I want to know, seriously, who killed God?